We're all misfits.
All right, you ragtag bunch of misfits.
You're a scrappy little misfit, just like me.
Biggest bunch of misfits I ever set eyes on.
The bathroom spray would go a long way.
Good morning, Misfits. You are tuning into another episode of the Misfit Podcast. Full goon squad in the house. Gentlemen, have you recovered from Thanksgiving?
I'm fucking OD on turkey, guy. I was listing off the turkey items I had. Obviously, turkey on Thanksgiving, turkey soup, turkey pie, and then turkey sandwiches. For the love of God, I'm turkeyed out.
Turkey pie.
Explaining turkey pie, is this like a pot pie situation?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, turkey pie.
Wait, did
pot
you
pie.
make a turkey pot pie from your leftover turkey?
My mom bought 30 pounds of turkey for about 5 people that eat turkey.
30 pounds?
6 pounds a person. It's not bad, right? Yeah.
That's
Noel's dad.
huge
How they
turkey.
calculate the Sherburne household?
Two 15-pound birds.
Oh, I was like, holy fuck.
Whoa.
Would you take it easy,
Birds?
kids?
Noel's dad proceeds to eat this much turkey, and he's like, "What am I eating? Is this like pigeon?" ask Noel if it was pigeon. I was like, "No,
That would be
turkey."
a huge pigeon, a 16-pound pigeon.
Kind of have in New York.
Was that like a way to say this is bad?
I think he wasn't sure what he was eating, so he was being polite. Sort of like I was when he fed me like beef
That's-
tongue.
Being polite? This is
No, trying some was being polite. No one had any fucking idea what Noel's parents are saying at dinner. We're like, "Noel, what'd they say?" They ramble on for like 5 minutes. We're like, "Noel, what'd they say?" He should be like, "Good." No, what the fuck did they just say? No one has any idea. Tell us.
She doesn't want to tell you.
She selectively translates.
Yeah, she doesn't
what's
want you to know
important.
what they're really saying.
Critical info gets relayed, and that's about it.
Fuck, poor Noel.
Poor me.
Trying to figure out what to translate. Nah, at least you have plausible deniability. You have no fucking idea what they're saying.
Just talking shit the whole time.
Yeah.
It's all right, though. It was a good Thanksgiving.
Nice.
Sounds like it. Like I said, pigeon, and you're sick of turkey, and I don't know. I have the opposite vibe on the leftover situation. I've been having a blast. On Thanksgiving was Friday for me, so Saturday I did I do this thing that I would do if I was having Thanksgiving by myself. So you got a big hunk of cornbread, butterflied that baby down the middle. Griddle with butter.
Butterflied the cornbread. Okay, you sliced the cornbread. Got it.
Nah, but that's a
Butterflied that
long
shit.
way.
I spatchcocked my cornbread.
Exactly. So I laid that baby down in some butter to grill it, and then I did a saucepan of gravy, stuffing, and turkey, and then I dumped that over the griddled cornbread. I will say I don't have the eating capacity that I did when I was younger. I could do 4 full plates on Thanksgiving, and I could definitely eat what I made the other day, and I got halfway through it. Luckily, I just ate the other half later. Then I did poutine.
So mature.
Poutine on Sunday and turkey noodle soup on Sunday night into leftovers now. I just think I like that shit so much that I can keep it rolling. I just got to change up what's going on there.
I didn't do any fancy leftovers. I just ate straight up the shit that I made. But I did make some
They look good.
potato pancakes the other day. You go leftover mashed potatoes, drop an egg in there, chop up some turkey, throw it in there, throw a bit of shallots in there, a little bit of flour. You kind of whip it up to a battery type of consistency, and then you fry it in butter.
Whoa.
Lovely.
Do you guys ever do fried mashed potatoes? You like a bunch of butter, and you put the mashed potatoes in the pan, and you get the
I'll just
a little bit of char on the bottom.
potatoes with a high temp to crisp up the bottom. I've never done it quite like that, but
You bake your mashed potatoes casserole style?
what's that?
You bake your mashed potatoes casserole
No,
style?
I've just done it before, either with a leftover or with a quick batch that I'm making. I don't make real fucking ball and mashed potatoes all that often. It's more just the quick version, and then I'll just turn the pan up hot for the last couple minutes to get a little crunch.
Have you ever had instant mashed potatoes?
Ted, did you ask if I'd ever had instant mashed potatoes?
Yeah.
Did you offend me with that statement?
I was a little bit, and I was interested in where that question was going before you cut out.
That's
if you're
like
gonna say instant mashed potatoes. I would say I had it
was.
7 days a week from ages 4 to 14.
Really? 7 days a week. So you've done it a lot. That's like a staple in my mother-in-law's house. Every Thanksgiving, she has like a special instant mashed potato recipe that Jen loves.
Wait, a recipe? Like put water in the box and
No, you put like
you
egg and
You gotta do it
shallots
with
and
broth.
shit in it. And
I've never had it, so I don't know.
I don't know, but I made my
with
mashed
a packaged
potatoes.
powder potato.
Yeah, box.
Oh, okay.
But I made my mashed potatoes, and she's like, "Oh, I forgot we weren't having instant." I was like, "Oh God, thank God."
Fuck.
Those like generational idiosyncrasies are the best.
Yeah.
Like my grandparents would come like down to southern Maine, and we would take them to like not like a super nice restaurant, but like a nicer restaurant. And you'd hear my grandmother like whispering like, "It's no Pizza Hut, I can tell you that." My dad's like, "What the fuck?" Love that.
That was
shit.
like with Sherb and I talked about that. What was it on? It was on a previous podcast, and it was like, yeah, you finish cooking, like leave the oven open so it heats up the house. It's like every
We
parent
Oh,
leave the oven open, heats up the house.
Doug.
My I went to New York City to visit my brother and his boyfriend for Thanksgiving. And my mom, we were directly across from his building is directly across from a Trader Joe's. And my mom was like, "I want to go to the Trader Joe's." And I'm like, "Mom, there's a fucking Trader Joe's in Portland. It's like 15 minutes away." And she's like, "It's just too far for me." And I'm like, "And the one in Brooklyn is closer." Like, she
5 hours.
Your mom sounds exactly like my mom.
I was like,
Couldn't be bothered going 8 extra minutes.
So did she?
I don't know.
It-
That
it-
parking lot at Trader Joe's is bullshit. It is a very stressful situation.
You gotta go at 4 a.m. or midnight.
You know why they do it? It's basically just
I
to limit
know-
the number of people who can be in the store so that the checkout procedure isn't a fucking shit show.
That is a go rodeo in there. It's like
I assume they just
those
like
lanes
the
are
cheaper
terrible.
real estate.
No, yeah, they make the size of the parking lot commensurate with how many people like can reasonably fit in the store without making the lines like egregious every time. So instead of waiting in line, you just have to wait in your car driving in circles around the parking lot.
Well, they lost me. I don't know if they care, but
There were they're pretty sad.
I go there like probably twice a year because they have weird, cool shit. But I don't
Frozen
think I would
stuff.
ever.
It's the
I
frozen
don't think I would
stuff.
ever do like grocery shopping there. It's just.
I
not
did
my
it for a
vibe.
little while, and I'm like, meh.
I've heard
Yeah.
they just relabel other generic grocery store stuff with the Trader Joe's label, and that's what they're selling. I don't know if
Sounds
it's
right.
true. That's just what I heard.
That's what everybody does.
I don't not believe that. Yeah, I
Basically.
feel like that's basically everybody.
That's Costco's thing. They go to Heinz and they're like, okay, give us your ketchup and we're gonna buy Heinz for whatever, $1 a unit, but then you're gonna sell us Kirkland brand at 50 cents a unit.
white
And we're
label.
not gonna tell the customers. It's the exact same shit that's in there.
Oh,
Costco is like-
it's pretty good. They've got
Yeah,
good
because
shit.
it's actually name brand stuff. They just go to the people and they're like, well, if we stop buying from you, you're fucked anyways. So their business model is so crazy.
Shaw's does not do that. I don't think. I think
Shaw's doesn't try, bro. Shaw's does not try.
Shaw's grows their own
Business
stuff and
titans,
labels it.
Costco and Shaw's are neck and neck.
Shaw's is routinely on the list of the top 5 worst grocery stores in America.
Yeah.
Is it really?
Yes, it's terrible.
Where else is it in the country? Is it just a Northeast thing?
I think it's just Northeast.
Yeah, they're owned by a company called Star Markets, and there's some Star Markets in other places in the country, I think.
Yeah.
I wonder if they all suck.
I feel like it's got to be like on par with like Kroger or like.
You know what's terrible grocery stores is Central Pennsylvania.
Well, I assumed it would be the
Eagle,
Mecca, bro.
giant eagle. I guess Wegmans is okay, but when I landed in Pennsylvania for grad school, when I went to the grocery store, I was like, oh
Take
my
the meth.
God, I'm
That's
going to
on aisle
die.
12.
Bro, if Aldi is your grocery store, you're in trouble.
Aldi.
Yeah,
Aldi is your
Aldi.
main choice.
We went to an
Wild
Aldi in
West.
Germany. Remember that basement grocery store that we went into in Germany? They have like big boxes of shit like
Oh yeah.
shrink wrap.
Oh yeah, that was no good.
That
was weird.
Yeah, it was,
Yeah, you got to go through those like turnstiles and shit, and you like, can't get out without going through the checkout.
I think that's just Europe.
Yeah, that's that's some weird shit. All right, this is almost like a unprepared episode, sort of. This is kicking it completely old school. You guys can decide whether you need the definition or not, but
Yes.
I want to talk about training camps. And I don't want to talk about training camps in the sense of like, let's get a bunch of misfits to come here for a weekend. I want to talk about the like rise of like this, rival company has a training camp where they have like, is that defined by the fact that they give online programming? Are they called that now because people actually go and train in a specific area? And I have a bunch of prompts to like go down through, but I think it's an interesting topic. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it is like for us to be able to define what we think it is and whether we are a training camp by the like newer definition of what that means. I've personally had a friend who was we'll call it an advisor to a CrossFit Games athlete that was looking for a new coach. And he told this athlete, the Misfit guys are the best at like what they do. You definitely want to go in that direction. And he was like, I trust you, but I don't want to go back to another training camp. Like, I'm not going to. I don't want to deal with that shit again. And recently, multiple high-level athletes have made a similar choice. What are they talking about? Are they talking about they don't want to go compete on a daily basis with other athletes? Do they not want their coach to coach like a large group of athletes? I think it's an interesting topic. I have my opinions on it, obviously, or I wouldn't have wanted to do this episode, but I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by what you guys think.
I am going to ask for the definition and origin and that sort of
So-
thing. I'll actually just provide some thoughts instead of just ask a stupid question. So I've heard the term, and initially the context that I heard it in was like a specific like, hey, this, let's say training think tank is doing a training camp, and that is a specific, like that's a fixed period of time in which athletes come to a common location and train and then redisperse back to wherever they are predominantly training. But more recently, it's like through whether it's a Morning Chalk Up article or whatever, it seems to be like that is becoming the new term for programming company. Is that
right?
Like for programming, a competitive programming and coaching company? So I guess maybe it's like what the context matters, like literally how the person is using the term training camp makes a difference. So I guess we could probably talk about both scenarios. But were you thinking of one over the other? Like I'm guessing you.
Well, that's kind of the like nuance to the conversation. I think the new style of training camp does exist out there, but I think we're all being lumped into the same category, and I don't think that actually makes sense.
It's not representative of what we do.
Right.
Us specifically.
Sure.
I just think it's the training camp definition that goes to my mind immediately is a training program that has a collective of athletes that are either competing in person or remote in a close-knit group that has some level of notoriety so people know it exists. Like that's essentially what I look at as a training camp. It's a pool of athletes that all follow a similar program. How much nuance is there? No one actually knows. I mean, you look at the larger ones in our community, have no idea who programs what for who, if the programs are different, if it's a sink or swim kind of thing, or if it's everything's individualized. And obviously a lot of them have to do with high-level athletes who've had success in the sport and now are essentially mentors for groups of younger athletes. So I look at it as a collective of individuals who are following a similar path or trust essentially a figurehead to kind of shepherd them kind of in the direction that they think is best for their pool.
Because historically, like we've obviously defined training camp as like this is a weekend long training camp, and we invite people and they pay to come here and we teach them and stuff like that. But it's not necessarily restricted to our, elite athletes, so to speak.
Is it a trend that people are starting to refer to like programming platforms or companies as training camps? Is that a thing that's happening?
I think it has a lot to it's literally just like a nomenclature thing. It's like, how do you describe?
I think it's morphed into that, but I think it started because people were going to Naples, Florida, places in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Like they were going to train there. So it started to be like, this is our training camp. And then now anytime there's an article written about something that doesn't have to do with that particular topic, we are referred to as a training camp and not, I don't know what like programming company. So this is a real flashy name for headlines.
Well, I think that has a lot to do with it, right? It's like if you're Sean Woodland at Rogue or whatever, I don't know if he commentated Rogue, but if he's like, yeah, and Paige Semenza of the Misfit Athletics training camp, like that's a little bit easier to digest than like Paige Semenza who follows Misfit Athletics programming or who's a Misfit athlete. I guess that would be an easy way to do it.
That actually is what he says. That's what he said. Him and Tommy said over the weekend when they were referring to Paige.
Do you refer to other athletes as part of a training camp? Is there like a distinction? I'm not
going to lie. A lot of times when I'm listening to those things, I'm waiting for them to talk about Paige.
Right.
Like I might be doing something else and watching, and then it's her heat, and I'm kind of like zeroed in. So I don't really remember. I think, Sherb, your response is interesting and probably kind of the easiest way to look at it. But then does that, again, lump us into a category that we may or may not want to be in? Do you think, there's no way to ask this question and have you be unbiased? It's not possible. Like we're literally talking about ourselves.
Sure, no, he'll be unbiased.
But from the point of view of this athlete that doesn't think they're going to thrive in that environment, is it fair for them to say, I don't want to go work with them because I had a bad training camp experience and I don't want to do that anymore?
That's like I had a girlfriend that was mean to me once, and I'm never going to have a girlfriend again. That's what I'm saying. Like, and again, it's I understand the concern.
Is that true though? Because I do know the athletes that do much better training on their own most of the year. Yeah. They train much better on their own a significant portion of the year, and then they go check in every once in a while. Like that setting, you can see that they blow up regularly, and people like I don't think completely understand why that's the case.
They don't have any help.
It's like
they're on an island on their own. They're remote. They're trying to figure things out on their own. Like I understand there are athletes who want to do their own thing for a lot of the year because it helps them get in the right headspace to compete. Maybe the stress of being underneath someone for most of the year or having too much structure takes some of the joy away from what they, do.
That's not what I'm referencing. I'm talking about training with other athletes, not the programming. I'm talking about an athlete that has decided that I don't want to go in and compete with all these people every single day. That's not the right environment for me. It fucks me up. Like maybe I just can't help myself to like not zero in on the things that we ask athletes to do. Like it would be really challenging if the three of us had three athletes come in and they were doing a workout and we gave them, it's a triplet, and we're like, you're locked in on this. Hunter tells his athlete to be locked in on, movement number 2, and you say movement number 3. Those athletes are good at what they do because of how competitive they are. That's a challenging environment to execute on that.
For sure.
I think is this athlete that you're referring to, did they have a coach, like
Yes.
like, hey, this is my coach at this training camp or training program?
They had a coach at one of the now considered one of the top training camps. And again, like I don't have the nuance of, I don't know what the program was. I don't know what the relationship was like. And I don't know what the environment was like that they were training in. I just know that some piece of that pie was like, no, like I don't, that's not for me. I'm a long range.
My initial thought to that is like, is it a circumstance? Do you think, and maybe this is just a good general question, do you think more athletes prefer to train by themselves, or do you think they prefer to be in that group setting, a training camp like setting? 3 athletes with Hunter, with Drew, with Sherb, each have a different focus. Do you think, or is it a split? Obviously, a lot of factors involved there, but like, it's just
I can say confidently that at least 60% of the athletes that I have worked with thrive in a do your own thing and then like go back and forth to a certain degree. Now that could be do your own thing 4 days a week, train with a crew the 5th day, and then some of them are like, I'm gonna train on my own for a month and then I'm gonna go check in and see where I'm at. But I can say that the people that want like to deal with, because it's kind of crazy dealing with a large group of competitors in terms of scheduling, in terms of what workout are we going to do first, in terms of like all kinds of different things, the personalities of it.
Well,
But I do know some really good athletes that have chosen the program that they're on or where they live based on the fact that they know that they get to throw down with a group of people every single day.
Yeah, I think that like in what it sounds like is, so I'm somebody who would probably, if I were a competitive CrossFitter at that level, my demeanor, my temperament is not one that wants to be around a large group of people like that. And you can think about all the instances during like just the open, maybe not as much recently with the new format, but when, say, quote, the open mattered more, when we had like 4 cameras getting set up and so needs 5 minutes to warm up. Well, now this person needs to take a shit and this person's been ready. This person doesn't have their pull-up bar. And it's like, just imagine that environment every single day where you have athletes who... Yeah, I mean, it
You
just...
guys can probably imagine it, right?
Yeah, no, I can't imagine.
We're gonna get that's on my list. We're gonna get there.
It's super overwhelming, especially for an athlete who maybe isn't somebody who's quite as outspoken. I think in those environments, the more, whether it's an extroverted personality, an alpha personality, whatever it is, like when you get a group of people together like that, there is going to be somebody who kind of like defaults to being, quote, in charge or like, the ringleader effectively. And if not everybody's there for the same purpose or like doesn't just, hey, I don't want to fucking deal with this person, I don't want to deal with this group of people, I could see it very easily becoming like, well, like if there's a training camp with 10 people training every single day, like the odds that I'm going to get along with all of these people or I'm going to be in the same situation that I'm in now is pretty high, so I don't want to fucking deal with it at all. And then it's a little bit unfair to maybe people like us who aren't, that's not how we operate. We don't have, partially due to our just geographic location, we don't have, 5, 6, 10, 15 athletes of that caliber training in the same facility every single day doing the same program. So I could easily see why any number of athletes, depending on their demeanor and temperament, as to why, like, oh, this isn't the fucking environment for me to thrive and train in. And maybe it is. I come to the gym once per week to train with this group in order to, make sure my competition wheels are still turning. And we talk about the importance of, training occasionally alongside somebody of similar caliber to make sure that you're still on par with the level of competition you're going to be expected to compete against. But it's super easy to see why that could be, like any training camp could be lumped into the, if you're a training camp, then there are 5 to 20 athletes of similar caliber. Oh, by the way, they also have the alpha personality. They're CrossFitters, so they're probably all type A personalities. And then everybody has their own nuance and things that they require for training that just make those sorts of environments more stressful than they are beneficial.
I think there's a be careful what you wish for factor that comes into play here. Like, think of from our perspective, coaching perspective, like in Ted, you as well with media, like how convenient would it be to have this like standalone building that competitors can access whenever they want, so the convenience factor is there for them specifically, and then like we can just anytime we want go over and do that. The athlete themselves is thinking the same thing from a convenience perspective, but then you have all of these athletes with that level, with that personality and with that level of competitive drive all under one roof. And they could be competing with each other. They could be competing for attention from coaches, depending on when they're in the building. I think in a lot of ways, you watch the like HWPO video of their like the tour of their facility and can seem like the grass is always greener on the other side, because if you could just snap your fingers and be like, we don't have to work around the affiliate classes and do X, Y, and Z. And then it's like, you sort of hear the rumblings that come out of these places when there's, drama, which can, I feel like to a certain extent is kind of inevitable and requires an adult to be sort of in the room. I think the convenience factor might not outweigh the sort of opposite side of that coin.
It's weird is I just as you were saying that, Drew, like you need an adult in the room. I think back to like the time, I don't know, a decade ago when we were all competing in the gym, and like there was
that's why I said
there's something to the character. There was something to the character that was built into managing personalities, and I know that's not always a
set the scene for the listeners. Sure, tell us what happened.
2013 CrossFit MF, Misfit Gym Portland's old name, was about a 5K away from where we are now. And we had myself, Hunter, Gabe, Cody, and Joe Carney. So 5 individuals who would end up competing at regionals that spring or summer, along with an up-and-coming Austin. And Caroline wasn't there yet, but she's about to make her presence in about, I don't know, a year and a half or so. Pretty close there. So
thumbs up when I thumb up my screen.
Because you're a nerd. Yeah, upgrade to Sonoma or Wildcat or whatever the fuck it's called these days. But anyways, but there was just a lot of testosterone in the room, a lot of people trying to assert their dominance, and there was a lot of bickering that occurred, and exactly what Hunter just described a minute ago, where it's like, I gotta take a shit. That's my pull-up bar. Where are my grips? That barbell's stupid. Why are you using high temps? Why aren't you using metal plates? Your compression shorts are stupid. Silly stuff.
You didn't do all your reps. That person
that
quit.
person cheated. That person quit. They did a
work
workout
upstairs and tell on the kids to mom and dad. And
it was an environment that I think helped a lot of us build character, but I don't know if it was necessarily a net positive when it came to developing athletes, because there was sort of a sink or swim attitude there. So you either just showed up and got to work every single day and got a little bit better, or you said that you didn't like the environment and you quit. And I really do think that was one of the most like pivotal moments kind of coming up through Misfit, and with all of us realizing like what we could achieve together by pushing one another. And it set the stage for future athletes to, qualify for regionals, teams qualify for regionals, athletes go to the games. But it's just one of those things where you can't necessarily say that it was all a good thing for us to be in the room together at all the time, and neither was it a bad thing that we were in the room all together. It's just like knowing how to figure out the nuance and what was positive in that environment, what was negative, and hopefully if this were to happen again in the future, we could cultivate the better habits and try to eliminate some of the more, silly things like the bickering that occurred as a result of 21-15-9s.
Well, it did happen again. I mean, we had the Jordan, Cody, Max, Austin year as well. And I think, so for the listeners, the idea here is, I'm trying to think of an analogy, like we took some coal and made some diamonds fairly quickly, and there's a trade-off for that amount of pressure being put on to a group in any given time. And I think in a vacuum, what happened there was like really pushed people forward. It was also a toxic environment and wouldn't have been sustainable, right?
No.
So that's why I think you can see these certain things happening to an extent. And then, one of the unfortunate things is you can have an adult in the room and still have the wrong mix of personality types and have it get a little ugly. So like,
at the end of the day, everyone in the room is an adult, right? And it's like can only control so much as the adult.
That's actually a super important point. I think maybe like a conductor, you know what I mean? Like someone at the front, just kind of, okay, let's start, let's stop, let's get in rhythm, like that kind of thing. I think the adults across the board is probably your best bet. But the reason I threw that like turn of phrase out there is just because I felt very in the like competitive, like I was woven into that. Like I would use it to my advantage. Like it was very easy to go in and manipulate someone into like murdering themselves in a workout. And again, like not a good environment if you want people coming back year after year.
Can any of you think of any other sport where it's an individual sport where they are training together, following a similar training protocol, and are but are competing against each other on the same field of play at the same time?
MMA, they do training camps before. When somebody signs a contract for a fight, they're in a 7 to 9 week training camp where oftentimes they will leave their home gym, go to their coach's facility, and train with other people that coach works with for 7 to 9 weeks in the run up to their fight. A lot of times those dudes are fighting on the same card. It's pretty rare that people will train together if they're going to fight each other on the night.
I think
it does happen sometimes.
I don't know that is that. I guess that's similar. But at the end of the day, those individuals will compete against each other, like physically one-on-one with those people. In CrossFit, like you're training together, but when it comes time to compete, like what other people are doing isn't necessarily directed by what you're doing. Like you are still, as a CrossFitter, you're still racing the clock, or you're racing the reps, or you're, as opposed to, I'm kind of tearing it apart, trying to pick your argument apart, because that's a good point. Are there other ones?
The best ones, Hunter, would lean more on your side. So if you watch any of the documentaries where it's like the really big name UFC fighters, the amount of vetting that goes into like, are you going to show up and do what you're supposed to do and not like try to land a shot so that you can go around telling people you did X, Y, or Z. Like they curate like the more higher up and the more money they can spend, they curate. The cool thing, and honestly, it reminds me of CrossFit MF 2013, is the young up-and-coming fighters will be like beating the shit out of each other preparing for these fights, which is crazy, but again, not sustainable. So there are definitely like levels.
Those young up-and-comers oftentimes are the punching bags for the guys that are training for a card too. They're, a big dude, like a dude my size, dude Sherb size, if you're in an MMA gym and there's a heavyweight who's training for a UFC card, you better believe you're rolling with them, because there's not a lot of dudes our size that can actually put the body weight necessary to get that person ready for what they're about to encounter, regardless of the skill level.
It is cool how much it correlates too, because there are elements to each fighter's game that would separate them if they only fought within that modality. And like there are legendary UFC fighters from like way back in the day that can still wrestle at a level or strike at a level or do X, Y, and Z at a certain level that they'll bring in. And you're like, well, that dude sucks or he's washed up. And they're like, yeah, try fucking taking away the only thing he sucks at. Like then it completely changes. And that just reminds me of not being the fittest person in the room, the strongest person in the room, the most skilled person in the room. Can you walk out into the gym at any given point and be like, I want to train with you because you're going to like make me lift a little bit heavier. You're going to push me in these rowing intervals or that sort of thing.
Thinking back to that environment though, with Cody, Max, Jordan, Caroline, that situation back then, I was thinking back, Austin, sorry, buddy. You're there too. Thinking back to that situation. Yeah.
Austin was the fit. The funny thing is Austin was the fittest one that entire offseason. That was the year that he got hurt at.
Yeah. So all I was going to say that was interesting about that environment is one of the things that I think we do a much better job of speaking to athletes about is understanding the difference between training and testing, even though it's something that's been kind of important to us forever, but helping athletes understand that when you're in the room with each other, you're using each other as a barometer kind of where you are. But like what you said about the 3 hypothetical athletes coming in for Hunter, myself, and you is that we'd have all different things to think about. I think would be better now explaining to those athletes, like, it's cool to see where you are with those athletes, but if you're like focusing on getting better at your row splits where he's focusing on big sets of gymnastics and the other person's trying to hang on to the barbell, like if you're able to do the thing I asked you to do and you're still close to the other person that's doing that, like that's a good sign. I don't know if that was as well communicated back then to athletes. So,
No, it was not.
So I think that's a huge difference maker now that I think, again, we wouldn't know until we have a similar environment created in our gym where there are, 3 thoroughbreds going head to head to find out if that's the case. But I do think we're better armed to deal with that situation now than we ever have been.
We're better armed to deal with that situation, but there will be another situation that comes up that you're not well armed to deal with yet, right? It's like it's the grass is always greener. It's the law of unintended consequences. It's whatever. It's hey athlete, like you're gonna lose this workout, but you're gonna focus on your chest to bar pull-ups, and the athlete that you're competing with or training with against, whatever, is gonna focus on their rowing. And it turns out your athlete has a shit chest to bar pull-up day and rowing day. And now they feel like shit because they lost to the athlete that they, or that they got annihilated by the athlete that they're supposed to beat. Or on the other end, it's like, hey, you should win this workout. It's Caroline's doing burpees, thrusters, and handstand push-ups, and like you just don't have a chance. And Caroline, you're gonna wax the floor, and for whatever reason, there's an off day. And now, like, not only did you tell that athlete, like, you're going to focus on this one thing, but that thing didn't go well, and somebody who should not have, in theory, like, done better than you did. I think the point is just like there's always going to be a rabbit hole in which an athlete thinks to themselves, like, I still didn't do, like, I should have beat them by more, or I should have been closer to them, or wow, even though I focused on X, Y, or Z, it still didn't work out that good, and I watched so-and-so crush it. I think the comparison is inevitable, and the it's really just like, I don't know.
It is inevitable.
There's a huge
You're right.
maturity element to the athlete. There's the how does the coach handle it. But at the end of the day, like it's hard for me to like see a scenario in which
I don't think those athletes should train together.
I was going to say, I think we're better
on that
armed.
piece.
how many
armed to have
athletes
those
are like that
conversations.
though?
So I think to clarify what I mean is if we had that scenario, typically what I would do is we'd get the day up on the board and I would circle one piece and say, you guys are going to race on this piece. We have to remember that this sport is a race and that you do have to have an athlete IQ and you have to game workouts and that sort of thing. But those other ones, like you guys want to go at a similar time, you guys want to have a similar schedule, but I don't think... I don't know, man. You're asking a zebra to ditch its stripes. I think my point is just that, like, and those are only like some of the training conflicts, right? We haven't even talked about the personalities, the again, like the temperament stuff,
I think we're better armed for those conversations nowadays, Hunter. I really do think that. And it's,
for sure.
Part of it's on the athlete too. It's like, hey, if you tell them like, hey, guess what? You had a shit day. You got better at the thing I wanted you to work on, and maybe you didn't, and you learned from whatever that happened. It's our job to arm them with the net positives from said training session as the coach. But again, going back to what you said about adults being adults, like some of it's on the athlete too. And if that athlete can't get out of the wrong headspace where like, I lost training, so I am a loser, like, that's a hard conversation to have with them. But like, hey, until you fix that part of your game, like, unfortunately, you are bringing down the ceiling of your potential. So we have to figure out how to conquer that beast first. And it opens up a new window for us to have a meaningful conversation as a coach and athlete to create that relationship make that relationship a little more tighter knit. I think that's probably what we're better armed to do now than we ever have been in the past.
I think and the other element is that you talked about like the adult in the room. It's like, well, if everybody is over, does it mean you're an adult if you're over 18? Because there are plenty of 24-year-olds who, are arguably not adults, and then you have a mix of, now we're talking about the mix of like age, almost like a generational gap in like what's acceptable. Like someone's on their phone fucking on TikTok and the other person's like, why are you on your, like, train? Why are you on your phone? Like, I just see, it's so easy for me to see how that could go in the wrong direction and not be controllable by the coach or by the quote adult, regardless of the scenario. Not to say that it can't be done by any means, and it's probably working out just fine for some training camps, but it's really easy for me to see how an athlete could get turned off.
It's just not one size fits all. And I think if you have a facility and there's just this idea of if I go there, it's going to be sunshine and rainbows because I'm either near someone with a lot of notoriety or I'm in a training environment that clearly this must work for everybody if it works for this person. Like, you guys have pointed out reasons why it would be good or bad this entire time. And it kind of has to be, like, depending on how many coaches you have and how much access you have to the gym, it kind of has to be one size fits all for it to work for as many people as some places are trying to do it for. And I just don't, that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too. It's like if you have enough, like a literal enough quantity of athletes, there has to be some degree of streamlining and of like, hey, we got to like of organization somehow, because you probably can't have 20 athletes in the same space doing 20 different things with 20 different coaches. That doesn't sound like it's sustainable either. So it's like, all right, well, the easiest thing to do is to group these people up, and that, you know, and then all of a sudden we start to experience those issues. So, yeah, I could, like I said, I could easily see a
Q equation. Like it really depends on the athlete to have the maturity in order to recognize whether or not they will progress in that type of environment. I mean, at Rogue, I talked to Paige a bit about it, and she's like, you know, the training weekends when I come up to Portland and there's other games athletes there that I'm able to push against goes a long way in my training, but I definitely couldn't be in that environment for all of my training.
Yeah.
It's a tool.
It's
you have to know how to use it.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, Drew, you cut you off.
No, it's what's fascinating too is some athletes are really good at hiding in the moment, like what they're going through. So you have an athlete like Paige who's just been around the block enough to know that this isn't the right environment for them.
Yeah.
And you have athletes show up and they just crush for an entire weekend, and you don't realize that was their like 159% and they were trying to put on a show, and
I got something to prove to X, Y, or Z, to my coach,
exactly,
to this group of athletes. I got to solidify my place in this group. Like
I want to know if you're coming to visit for the first time, I want to know if your fucking heels can stay on the ground. Like if you beat someone by 2 reps in an AMRAP, I'm gonna flying fuck, because there are too many people that have walked through this gym that are the fittest person on earth on a Tuesday at 3 p.m. with the perfect conditions, and then they, you know, hear fucking, I don't know what terrible Imagine Dragons song at 900 volume at semifinals, and they completely bury themselves within 10 seconds of the workout starting, and you're like, huh, okay. So when someone shows up and like tries to prove a point like that, it's actually not always obvious that that's what is happening. Like they don't carry themselves in that way. They don't bring that level of intensity, which honestly is probably better, right? Because if you're not going into it with like competition anxiety, you probably are going to be able to execute a little bit better. But I find it fascinating that some athletes can like be cranking the volume way up and not tell you at all. Like you can even tell that that's what they're doing.
It's almost like a red flag too. You know, I could think of recently in our last 5 years, we've had athletes that come through the door and do exactly what you just described. They're dead set on winning every single training piece that happened here. That's all they talk about before, during, and after the workout is if they won and how things went. And, you know, if they get back to that training environment in 2016 where it was like, I won, or this was hard, that was hard. And we're like, you can't win training. You're all going to have a subjective experience. Everyone's going to have a different opinion on what was hard and what was different based on your strengths and weaknesses. You know, now I would see an athlete come through our doors and have that same attitude. And it's like, you know, maybe not a come to Jesus moment on the first time that you do that, but like, hey, let's talk about what's actually valuable here. Let's talk about what we need to be trying to do in a training session. We need to make personal improvement to shore up your holes so that when you go when it actually matters, not fucking Wednesday at 1 p.m., but, you know, day 3 of regionals or day 3 of the CrossFit games, you're able to show up and do what you need to be able to do. You know, like the practice heroes of high school football. It's like, fuck, you are the coolest and fittest and strongest and best football player on a Tuesday double session, but you ride the bench at the game because you can't perform when it matters. Like, that's sort of what I think of when I think of those athletes. And it's a shame because I think a lot of those athletes are just a headspace away from being what they want to be. But that headspace isn't an easy flip of a switch. It's years of hard work figuring out why you think that way and how you can get out of that headspace to reach your goals.
There has to be a difference between who you are on that day and who you are on competition day. There has to be. And it could be literally your capacity or your level of focus. It could be the alter ego comes out. There's a lot of nuance within what it is that makes your competition persona different. But these types of places that we're talking about, is it possible for you to not have it happen in the opposite direction? Have you be the competitor all year long and just be like burnt out, or not? Like maybe you're not even excited when you get to semifinals. It's like, wow, this is actually, these people on my left and right aren't even as good as the ones that I have in the gym. Like, can I get myself to rise up to this level? It's complicated.
It seems like
too,
training in that type of environment where you're competing every day could serve as a distraction if you're not focused enough. Because think about the athlete who focuses so much on beating the other person that they're training with versus working on the things that they need to work on.
How much of their batteries used doing that?
Yeah, and honestly, like, you can flip this upside down as well. Like, I can play devil's advocate to myself. I know athletes that train alone that test daily and don't train daily. Like, you can still do that to yourself. Like, I need to either absolutely bury myself or I need to game every single workout so that, you know, when I do go on Fitter or wherever to like find out how I did, I can get there. So there are some athletes that they get to a very high level through the mode of blood, sweat, and tears, and don't realize that at a certain point, like, something has to be different and more deliberate about the way that you're practicing and training compared to the way that you compete. Like, you have to be able to like slow down and cultivate that extra gear over a long period of time instead of fucking 4 times a day and thinking that that's what's helping you. Because at a certain point, you can probably reach a fitness level where maybe you finish in the exact same spot at the games every single year because, like, what got you here is not going to get you there, sort of a thing.
I think it's also like you gotta, whether you're a coach, an athlete, whatever, you gotta kind of put this entire conversation into context with respect to like the timeline of the sport. So like, it's not all that, it's fairly recent, I guess is the better way to put it. It's fairly recent that, quote, training camps have become a thing. Right. So like previously, again, going back to 2013, like the only way that we were at training camp, quote unquote, is because we live geographically close to each other. And as the sport has grown and advanced and companies athletes are afforded more money from whether it's a training camp or for sponsorship, whatever, now athletes are moving. So it's like, so now an athlete has created a lot of stress by uprooting their life to move and train at a different training camp. And oh, by the way, half of the athletes at the training camp have been in the sport since 2012, the times that we're talking about, when it was like, yeah, I'm just going to pick a company and I'm going to follow their programming online and haze myself. And when I get to regionals, maybe one of those coaches will shake my hand and be like, hey, how's the program going? That sort of thing. And that has evolved to all the way to like, hey, we have a dedicated facility for competitive athletes to come train, regardless of, you know, what stage of competition you're in, whether you've been in the sport for 10 years or you're this up and coming, you know, 19-year-old who's doesn't know their ass from their elbow, but has a hell of an engine to work with. There are just so many factors, and not to defend training camps, but like, it's a little bit new for them as well. Like it's like, it does seem like a great idea. It's like, what if we had a facility where we could house 20 CrossFit Games athletes to train and just like create this fucking amphitheater and like coliseum where athletes are training against each other every day. It sounds like a great idea until we start talking about all of these, you know, these examples as to why and how it could go wrong. And if things can go wrong, they will go wrong.
Even and I'm not going to name names, but even the more like the people who have been around for a longer period of time that do have the training camp will tell you like, yeah, it worked, but holy shit, Like
Yeah,
I took
sure,
like
you're gonna pay
19
for it.
years off my life.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like that kind of thing. Because some of them do, especially you get into the summer, have an amount of athletes that is like, does the room just explode? Like, can the egos be contained within four walls? Like, is that even possible? So one of the things that we skipped over here that I think Sherb touched on kind of in his opening remarks was where programming falls into this whole thing. Because as far as I can tell, Sherb, you let me know if you agree, we are not a training camp by the new definition.
Nah, agreed. We are not.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay. What do we do?
Honors of mine.
What are we doing? So if every article that's written that we're mentioned in says training camps, obviously we are a programming company, programming and coaching.
Yep.
What happens here? Like if an athlete wants to come work with us, what happens here? And would that, maybe after we can tackle what the middle ground would look like?
I mean, the perspective I have on that is that if you are looking for a plan to become the fittest version of yourself and you need someone to help shepherd you through understanding how that programming is written and how you should implement it, that is essentially where our area of expertise lies. We have a thought out program that considers the ins and outs of what a competitive CrossFit athlete needs to be able to do to play and achieve at the highest level. But not all athletes possess the intrinsic talent or the sports background or just know enough about the history of the game and know enough about themselves to do that alone. That is where we are most helpful. If you are looking for help on how to implement what we think is the best program available to CrossFit, competitive CrossFit athletes, that is where our expertise lies. And I would, put our hat in the ring against anybody on that level of developing athletes from literally scratch to CrossFit Games athletes. I think one of the main things that happens when you're talking about like shiny object syndrome is you could go on YouTube and you can see one of those high-end facilities that, some singular athlete had success, and because of that, they gained financial wealth and were able to offer this sexy facility and these pedigree of coaches. How many of those high-level competitive CrossFit coaches have taken an athlete from fucking zero to hero? And if I'm mistaken, I would like someone to correct me. So if someone's listening to the podcast and be like, what about so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so? I mean, I'd like to know it, but I can't think of any. And that's what I think is unique about what we do relative to, other people in our space.
Hunter?
Same. Yeah. Everything Sherb said is accurate. And I think one other element that you briefly touched on, but I think is important, is that like, we've been on the coaching side for most of that time. And if you qualify finishing in the middle to bottom of the pack of the 2014 Mid-Atlantic Regional as a high level of achievement in the sport, thanks, but probably not.
Kind.
But like, I think the difference is that, like you alluded to, there are a lot of training camps out there whose notoriety become apparent because of the success of a single athlete, or a single athlete has gone from athlete to coach, and the assumption is that they are equally as good of a coach as they are an athlete. And that's not to shame any of those athletes or to suggest that they're not good coaches, because I have no concept of how good one of those athletes might be as a coach. But the fact is that we have been observing athletes and the sport as a whole from a coach's perspective for essentially as long as anybody who's still competing at the individual level is competing. So we've watched that evolution occur. It's actually funny because I've thought about that a lot more recently when I'm thinking about affiliate level coaching, and that, in my opinion, like, the level of affiliate coach is it is not necessarily as high as it used to be, because the affiliate coaches who started when CrossFit was new and still just kind of coming onto the scene are the same people who spent hours opening up the Windows media files and watching fucking Greg Amundsen do Fran in 17p digital format on their
was
screen, and I'm watching like these old Kelly Starrett videos of like him in his fucking garage filming with a Motorola Razr how to voodoo floss, and like all of those things were things that I was like we were absorbing, and I learned like a ton of stuff from you, Drew, and other coaches and whatnot, and it's like we've observed the game from the coaching perspective for far longer than any of us have ever been competing at a successful level by basically anybody's objective definition. So I don't know if that answers the question, but at least provides a different perspective for the listener and an athlete as to like, hey, what's maybe it's like what separates you from another training camp? It's like, well, we've been coaching the whole time. Everybody else, like a lot of people got big because somebody stood on top of the podium and they say, hey, I got the program for you, which actually isn't the program for you. It's a program that worked for me that maybe it will work for you versus, hey, we've been trying to master the program that doesn't work for everybody. Instead, we're finding the program that can work for everybody with the guidance from, the coaching staff and like the articles and the podcasts and the instructions on the programming.
I think what you're referencing is like kind of like the hipster days of CrossFit. Like when things are like that and that subculture exists, you're drawing people in that are going to be disproportionately obsessed with finer details of like back then the content that was being delivered like could not be produced at a rate where I could get enough of it. Therefore, I was watching gymnastics videos and weightlifting videos and, West Side Barbell and all that different stuff.
Every single fucking Cal Strength video that was on the internet.
Exactly. You find all of that stuff in the way that you can. And one of the funny things is that I found when you take a like I'm not big on labels, but you go like introvert, ADD, and you let someone like that start talking about something that they're passionate about. You fucking go from like, I'm not saying anything to like, will you please shut the fuck up? Now, in this instance, I'm the one who needs to shut the fuck up. And I'm typically in those scenarios speaking to an athlete who is so much more on the physical end of this conversation. And they're there, they're there for the adrenaline and they're there to go hard and they're there to deal with that. And there is, throughout the history of sports, there is the Venn diagram of the people that carry both, that end up being really good in both categories, especially if they give themselves some time, to go from their 20s or 30s up into their 40s, 50s, 60s, that sort of thing. But the stereotype is there for a reason. Like the athlete, like a lot of them are like, I already did my work. Can I get the fuck out of here? I don't want to sit here anymore. Like I'll do double sessions, triple sessions if that's what it takes. But like once I'm done, like I don't really want to talk to you about the reverse hyper. No one knows how to use those things. Do they even
the drink stand?
Yeah. Like I thought that was just your desk, that kind of thing. So that's where my mind goes in that. And that's again, like, just like you said, Hunter, like we don't really have a clear picture of, three of our biggest competitors are our biggest competitors because of the name at the top. Like,
sure.
Like that's something that's going to be super challenging to deal with. But like, what is the saying, Ted? Is it a bug or a feature?
Yeah.
It's not a bug, it's a feature. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I feel about it, because I'm in contact with some of the best athletes in the sport on a like weekly basis. And I really want our affiliate to go to like semifinals, and I really enjoy the like I've joked about like sitting in the corner with my sunglasses on so I can give the like put your heels down cue, and that's my contribution to coaching class, like as Coach B, like, and I meant that in like an A-B sense, not Coach Bergner. I know that was a bad analogy there. but I
Probably
like
agree to keep your heels on.
I like that the litmus test of what makes it through the filter and gets to me is this idea of like, is the person passionate about it? Are they into it? Do they really want to get better? And there are people at the very highest levels that, you know, carry that with them and they are thoughtful. And that's why I communicate with them on a regular basis. And then there are people that are like that have been in class for like 2 weeks. And I think that is a feature of who we are and what we do. We are looking for a level of like, we talk all the time about you meet us halfway and we will come, like if that's a super long distance, we will also come that far to meet you. Like we've been doing this long enough for me to know that I have been coaching so many athletes at the CrossFit Games that you literally have to like be like, I hope you're doing okay over there because I got to go with this other person in this other direction. And like, that's super challenging. Like, is that my mountaintop? Is that like the end all be all of everything for me and like fulfillment in my career? Or is it like working with people that are passionate, you know, at the business level, at the coaching level, and then like just people that I want to work with athlete wise. Like, so, I think you can get caught up in the like keeping up with the Joneses thing from the perspective of like maybe letting those articles that you guys talked about like dictate what you want to try to accomplish. But I think it's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah. The thing that I think is interesting with what you just said there is that like I've worked with a few athletes that have stood on the podium at the CrossFit Games, and obviously an amazing weekend and super proud of their abilities. But, you know, I know I actually do this. I treasure the relationships I've developed more so than the people who stand on the podium at the end of the weekend and what have they been able to help athletes that may never stand on the podium achieve. You know, if I were to rank accomplishments as a coach, I would say the growth that athletes have supersedes the end result at the end of the season. And it took going through a situation where I had one season where 2 athletes that I worked with stood on the podium in the age groups. Like that was really cool. Something I'm very proud of, but like, you know, it's no different than I talk to members out here when I say, you know, I work with CrossFit Games athletes, but you losing 50 pounds and fucking walking in here looking like a different person is huge. Like those relationships are honestly what I think is unique about coaching and what I think some athletes obviously get into the space of wanting a coach to achieve a certain goal, but the good stuff that occurs is sometimes what's lost on them. You know, I didn't succeed this year, so therefore this was a failed experiment, and I'm going to try someone else next year because this didn't work. And you know, I see those athletes have those things happen to them, and I want to be like, you know, grab them by the shoulders and shake them, like, we're on the right path. It might not happen on the timeline you want, but we're on the right path. Stay the course. I believe in you, and I think that's, you know, what I treasure as a coach, working with somebody more so than, you know, the end result at the end of the season. Obviously, I want my athletes to succeed. I want them to reach their goals, but I want to see them grow as people and, you know, use CrossFit as a medium to develop themselves as a person.
So what can the middle ground look like here? Like in my mind, it's leave me the fuck alone and watch what happens at the CrossFit Games. Like those athletes exist. There are a lot of them out there. And there are all the way to the opposite side. Like I'll move halfway across the world if I can train with people on a daily basis. Like there's that. And then I want to throw out the red flag scenario. When you can't do either, yeah, like a real problem, right? Because you have people who go into a competitive environment and crumble, and then are even worse if you make them train alone. And what sucks about that scenario is, like, not to get too deep, but there's usually some like real aggressive childhood trauma that person went through. So like what pushes them to end up in the gym is based on that trauma, but then not being able to deal with any scenario that allows them to improve. We've seen that a lot. We see that a lot with like your quote unquote, like the people with all the potential that can't necessarily get it done, because it's like there's an expectation that's been put on an athlete, and if you can't meet that, then you suck, and you know you're of no value to me. So like training alone, you too much negativity mentally there, and then you lose, and well, that's proof that I'm no good. So to me, I think about it from that perspective of just developing that red flag scenario is kind of tough because you usually have a lot of empathy for that person. Like, it sucks that that's the case, but getting through to them and making a big change there isn't always
easy
in the
work.
cards. No, it's not always in the cards either. Like, your best bet is to potentially help them on a more personal level, but that's probably a bit of a side tangent. What is the middle ground here? How does someone benefit from working on their own and working with other athletes? Like, what would you guys suggest? How should people think about this stuff? Because again, too far in one direction is probably not good for everybody.
I think the baseline is that as an athlete, you have to understand yourself. You have to try to recall instances in which you've been training with a group of people and what that sort of does to your psyche versus an extended period of time of coming into an empty gym and training by yourself for an extended period of time. And just having a feel for what you prefer. And then the next step is, like, before you make a commitment to joining, quote, a training camp, or maybe more specifically the physical act of uprooting and moving, or committing to a X amount of days or whatever of training in a facility with a certain group of people, like, there should be, and I don't know if this occurs or not, but some sort of interview, or basically an opportunity for the athlete to, like, talk to somebody else. Maybe it's a peer, it's a friend, it's somebody that they know who's in that training camp, it's a coach, it's somebody to be like, hey, what's it honestly like there? Like, is this a, like, and that can be a tough question to ask. And if you're a coach who's, like, dealing with an environment that's not necessarily conducive to health and happiness, like, that's a hard conversation to be like, well, right now, to be honest, like, there's like 7 athletes who are at each other's throats. One's, like, doing X, Y, or Z off in the corner. The other hates everybody else. And then 2 or 3 of them are just pretty happy with how things are. It's like, there has to be a high level of transparency and honesty in order for that athlete to thrive wherever they're going. And the athlete has the responsibility of asking those questions, of poking and prodding and actually thinking about, like, what do I need in order to compete and train or achieve the goals or achieve the level of competition that I want to.
Yeah, the vibe check is, I think, is really important. I think that the responsibility on the athlete to go and experience what it's like to be in that environment with the group of people they're intending to work out with is huge. If the personalities mesh, if, there's anything that jumps out to them as something they don't want to be a part of, or they didn't like certain parts of that, like, that's a really personal question. And, some things you might have to think through at a more critical level, and you might need to, like, after experiencing said training camp or said group, that you have a conversation with your coach or a coach, or it's just another person. I think if you can work around some of the, personality quirks that can come with a type A high level CrossFit competitor, and can you understand that, like, I can think of athletes who are very direct with how they speak, and other athletes that do not like that conversation, or those kind of conversations, do not thrive in that environment. And they decide, because that personality type is something they don't mesh with, they choose not to work out with that person or be around. That is part of the process. And what I would say is, it's not a universal thing for all people. We know high-level competitors who spend a lot of their off-season training people who are nowhere near high-level competitors, but they like the vibe of the people that they're working out with and that environment, even though they're, maybe never going to be a CrossFit Games athlete, but they can give them a good push on a skier. They're going to go work out with them a bunch and enjoy that situation. So I think it's equal parts, like, figuring out the vibe, having someone to, workshop your headspace on whether or not this is a net positive or net negative situation. And then just, being able to say, nope, this isn't going to work for me, is a huge part of what I think is going to lead an athlete to have a successful experience working out with other people, because we know, and we've seen it firsthand, how valuable being in a room of other people who are trying to do the same thing can do for an athlete. It's just figuring out what room that is.
I think it's also really easy for an athlete to see the roster of other athletes or coaches or former high-level competitors at a certain training camp and think to themselves, like, there's no way that this isn't going to be beneficial to me. And that's fair. Like that would be difficult for any athlete to see, like, oh, there's 10, consistent CrossFit Games performers, top 5 semifinalists every year. It's also coached by X, Y, or Z. They have a ball and training facility. Like, there's a lot of allure in that sort of thing. But again, it a lot of it to me comes down to understanding what you want and then being willing to I guess shop around, like ask questions, talk to different coaches, talk to athletes about their experience, and just attach yourself to the training camp or go in the direction that suits you best, and not necessarily the one that has the most jerseys on the wall, so to speak.
I think sure, that's the kind of nugget that I was looking for. For me, in my mind, I'm like, okay, so get out of your comfort zone. Like, whichever side of this thing that you're on, make sure that you are going over to the other side for what is an amount of time that will be helpful to you. So if you do need to go off to the side and work on your own for a while, but if it gets to a point where like motivation starts to drop too much because that's outside of your comfort zone, then that's probably when you can call it. And obviously the opposite side would be making sure that you are in a competitive environment a bit more if you are kind of the lone wolf. But what you talked about is like create your own training camp, not of athletes who go to the semifinals or CrossFit Games. You see all the time, like an athlete who's at like a super high level and they're like always tagging this one friend, and people will like want to know like games.crossfit.com, like, guy came in 937th, he sucks. And it's like, it's different when you're training in your garage or like an open gym, like empty gym situation, to have someone there because of the vibe check or because they can bring something to the table elsewhere. Like, we've definitely seen it here. Like when like times get real tough in competition season, we start that text chain, who can show up. Like, if you're going to the CrossFit Games and I'm your training partner, we're doing rowing intervals, like, if I can bring something to the table, it ain't the fucking speed that I'm putting into the rower. Like, so if I can bring something to the table, then you can start to look at how you could create that on your own.
I think one of the things to add there, Drew, is there are a lot of CrossFit athletes that are lone wolves that work out on their own all the time. I think one of the things that's lost in the magic of CrossFit and CrossFit affiliates are those athletes putting themselves into class. Like, that is a recipe we have always used around here. When an athlete is struggling with either motivation or burnt out or coming off a competition, they want to get back into it and they need to like restoke the fire. It's like, go take class for a little while. You might beat Andy at fucking 89.9% of the workouts, but you give him running and, rowing, good fucking luck, and try to keep up. And like, that push is so beneficial. If you try as a CrossFit athlete to chase down the best endurance athlete in your gym and chase down the best weightlifter and chase down the best gymnast, there's a good chance you're going to be the best CrossFitter in the room if you're equally working on all those things at the same time. And when you get in your own little bubble and you're the greatest athlete on earth and you never get pushed by anybody, it's a good chance you're patting yourself on the back and you're not propelling yourself forward there. So put yourself in a situation where you don't like the fact that you're losing to fucking Andy on the running intervals. Guess what you're going to work on? Your fucking running intervals. So next time you race Andy, you're a little closer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, is like within a CrossFit affiliate, there's probably a workout somewhere that exists somehow that one of those affiliate athletes could be top 10 in the world on, in the open or something like that. Maybe not top 10, but you know what I mean. They could, if all the stars align and the movements are right and the time domain's right, like that athlete could theoretically drop a 50th place in the open worldwide or something like that. And as a competitor, you want to try to find that athlete. And maybe that's the specific examples too much, but what you're saying, Sherb, is like, yeah, Andy might back squat 125 pounds for one, but good luck catching that motherfucker on the road.
5K, good luck to you.
Yeah, enjoy. So you have to, and that can be a non-threatening way for a competitive athlete to compete a little bit, because ultimately they're not competing against Andy in the open, right? I'm pretty confident Caroline's got Andy in the open, but if
this year
Andy can, in a non-threatening way, push Caroline in the 5K run, like, how much benefit does that have to her? There's no pressure on her because she knows that he's not competing against her specifically. There's just that, like you said, I think that's a really important point for an athlete to be able to try to create that training situation.
I think a lot of people wondered how Austin was able to train for as long as he did, trying to make it to the CrossFit Games for the first time. And I can tell you that, like, I'm not sure that there's anyone that's better at I don't care if you beat me in this one thing. In fact, if you could drag me along, that would be super cool of you to do. If you can run a little bit faster than me, if you can lift a little bit more weight than me, if you can do that, then I'll be good. Because he has always been the opposite of the practice player. Like, can I train enough to be able to go fucking show you what I'm able to do out on that floor? And I think that's kind of a good segue into my final thoughts. A lot of athletes grow up in the sport. A lot of athletes start. I mean, there's the whole separate side conversation of teen up into your 20s and to the regular, the individual or team division. But then there's also just the fact that, like, some people just start younger at a CrossFit gym. Like, athletes got a lot of pizzazz and are willing to train really hard in their early 20s, that sort of thing. Allow yourself to change when it comes to these topics as you work your way through. A lot of people, again, put a lot of labels on themselves. I don't like training partners. I like to completely train alone. I can't handle losing to another person. There are certain stories that people will tell about themselves that will change as they get older and they mature a little bit more. And I think finding yourself somewhere in this middle ground that we're trying to insinuate has to do with allowing yourself to change when you do mature. Because I know of athletes that, like, were like gasoline on a fire being brought into any situation when they were younger, and they're not that way at all now. But the thing is, you have to admit that to yourself. You have to be like, actually, like, need that push now. Like, I was full of piss and vinegar when I was 19 years old, and now, like, it takes a little bit more for me to get going, and it just helps to be with other athletes for 2 or 3 days a week. But again, so many people get really wrapped up in labeling themselves X, Y, or Z and just stick with that even when it's not true.
Yeah, I want to say do the personal work to figure out why you're that way. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've been taught, kind of never, like, sort of like Hunter said, if you consider doing really well at CrossFit, going to regionals one single year, like, that's the highest that I'm going to get in this sport. But
what if you almost made it 1 year? Is that good?
Cool.
Thank you. Fit.
Is that the year they had to do 11.1 18 times?
Yeah.
It was just 2 muscle ups for time.
Yeah, and it's 86-inch box jump.
I would have
but the lesson that I think CrossFit has taught me the most as a very mid-level, low-level competitive athlete is, when you get into the thick of things and you want to react a certain way and you don't dive into figuring out why you want to react that way, you stand to mature a ton. And for a lot of athletes, that's the work that needs to be done more so than the extra rowing intervals and the back squat sets. Like, a training environment is going to benefit you. If you cannot use it to your benefit, you need to figure out why that's the case. I'm not saying you need to do it all the time, but you need to put yourself in that environment and figure out why you can't handle losing to so-and-so, or why that you think you have to win every single training piece, or that why your value lies in what your Metcon score is. You have to dive into that stuff and figure it out if you truly hope to be successful in the sport.
I think my final thought is just understanding that, like, this landscape is going to continue to change. One, it's relatively new as far as, like, we talked about literally the term training camp is pretty new, but the whole concept of competitive CrossFit athletes getting up and physically moving geographically, or, fully committing to X, Y, or Z with a given training camp. My guidance to an athlete is to just not get distracted by shiny object syndrome. Don't get distracted by a roster of athletes at X training camp. Don't be distracted by the name on the door. Don't be distracted by, all those are short-term things that aren't necessarily indicative of what you need. At the end of the day, whether the facility is this 20,000 square foot place that just got outfitted with custom bars and plates, or you're in a fucking dungeon with the 2004 journal articles, minimum necessary equipment for a CrossFit affiliate, you can still do the same fucking thing. You don't necessarily need the fancy lights, the shiny, those shiny things. It's about making sure that you're finding out what's appropriate for you with both respect to the setting, the peers, the people that you're around, the coaches that are taking you under their wing, and just the general vibe and kind of culture of the place that you're planning to or considering to be your home.
I thought about ending this with the shock value of saying, don't call me a fucking training camp. But I'm also not like against it. Like it's not something that I wouldn't be open to figuring out how to do correctly. But I think it's the wrong label currently. And again, I think about it because there's people just assume that like this thing is this thing is this thing is this thing. And I can tell you right now that from like a programming perspective and a personality perspective and a support system perspective, like the programs are so much different. They really are like vastly different from one another. And for those athletes that are out there that don't want a training camp, well, guess what? Come on over, because we're not a training camp. Did we do it?
We did it.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of the Misfit Podcast, and thank you to our show sponsors, sharpentheaxeco.com. Use your favorite athlete code. You save 10%. They get 10%. They still don't know when semifinals are or where they are, but they're going to need the money when they come around. Properfuel.co, same idea. Use your favorite athlete code to help support them. TeamMisfit.com for your affiliate programming needs. MisfitAthletics.com for your individual programming needs. See you next week.